Well, Bonnie stole my line. I was going to say good morning to all you shining stars. And thank you for joining me in my vocal warm-up for this talk. So, as you know, the theme for this month is freedom in a world that works for everyone. And the way it worked for me to think about this talk was to divide it up into three components. So I'd like to start with the first component by sharing a personal experience that I think illustrates the sense of personal freedom. When I was in Virginia a few months ago, I attended a workshop at the CSL in Falls Church, and the practitioner that gave the workshop called it the power of yes. And you'll notice that she has the traffic lights on here, the red, the yellow, and green, and I'll refer to that in a moment. So she started out the workshop by having us consider those areas of life, the kinds of things you see on the prayer request card, like career, relationships, prosperity, health. And then we were, in turn, as we thought about each of those areas of our life, to determine what was the most important thing. What did we want to see expressing in each of those areas? And she called those the power yeses. I kind of think of them as the fist-pumping yes, or maybe sometimes the hell yes. And she used the green light to represent those. An example of that, if you were thinking about finances and prosperity, a green light, which you really wanted to see manifesting, would be, I'm debt-free, and I have $10,000 in the bank. After we went through that process, we listed the non-negotiable no's, and those were the red lights. Those were the things that we absolutely would not engage and would not want to see showing up in that area of life. And an example of that might be, if you were considering relationships, you might say that verbal or physical abuse was a non-negotiable no. That would be totally unacceptable. And then we went on to the yellow lights, and these were the things that trip us up, the things that are barriers or our worries or concerns or any issue that might be running through our thinking that might prevent those green lights, those power-up yeses from manifesting. What's in the way? So our real work during that workshop was to look at those yellows and figure out how are we going to move those out of the way so we can get to the greens. As I worked with a number of these areas, I made an interesting discovery. Well, not so surprising, really. But as I looked at each one and I burrowed down, what am I thinking about this? What's in the way? What's really preventing me? What's the block here? And in every single case, as I got deeper and deeper, I realized that it was the issue of lack of self-worth. Oh, you again? Oh, there you are showing up again. So the next step in our workshop was to come up with an affirmation to work with whatever the concern was. So in this case, obviously, I needed to create an affirmation that dealt with self-worth. And as we turn things around and make it affirmative, the first sentence in my affirmation went like this: I am valuable beyond measure. I thought, that's pretty good. I like that. I said to myself, you might want to try saying that. I am valuable beyond measure. And as I worked with it, I still liked it, but I couldn't help but begin to hear this little voice in the background saying, oh yeah? So I realized I need to add another line to this affirmation. So what I wrote next was, my oneness with Source is my guarantee. And I've been around in the New Thought realm long enough to have pretty ingrained that concept of the infinite presence, the one mind, total abundance, total ability, infinite possibilities, and I'm part of that. So I must be valuable. I can't get out of it, whether I want to or not. If I'm part of that, then I am valuable. So I began to accept that affirmation, but just for good measure, I added one more line. And that went like this: there's no yardstick by which I must measure up, but my life, my own life as spirit. So I felt pretty comfortable, pretty pleased with my affirmation. And the final step for this workshop was to discuss with our workshop partner how we were going to implement that. We had homework to do. How are we going to use our affirmation? So I told my partner that I would be using my affirmation, saying my affirmation every day at work at the beginning of the day when they would have in the school a moment of silence. So I did that every day, got to be a habit. I got to look forward to it. I appreciated the sense that it brought to me in the beginning of the day. And I noticed that it began to pop into my mind from time to time. I'm walking down the hallway thinking, oh, I hope I got that right, or I don't think I know how to do this, or some issue. And then I would realize, hey, grab your affirmation. And I would do that through my affirmation, and things would settle. And the more I used it, the more I immersed myself in that sense of what it reflected, and I allowed those words to wash over me, I really began to feel this sense of a great weight lifting from my shoulders, a sense of relief, a sense of release. But actually, at that time, the word that kept coming into my mind was freedom. This just feels so freeing. More recently, I was listening to a talk by Tammy Simon. You might know her as the producer of the Sounds True programs, and she has a program of her own now. And part of her talk, as I was listening, I thought, this is kind of explaining to me a little bit why this affirmation is so freeing to me, why I find it so important. And what she was explaining, and this does not come as a surprise, she says, there's only one you. There's only one me. There's no precedent for any of our lives. We've never been here before, at least not in these particular bodies, with this particular configuration of relationships, with this set of worldly circumstances, all new. And we cannot look outside of ourselves for the direction of how to do it. Who are we supposed to be? What's our life supposed to look like? Even if we study with the most enlightened speaker and tried to emulate them, we'd only be a second-rate version of whoever they were. It's best to be the very best achievement of our own self that we possibly can. And we need to look inside to our heart to find out what those steps are going to look like. We have to follow that knowing, even if it doesn't look anything like what the spiritual master says, even if it doesn't look anything like what your family is telling you it should look like, or what your society tells you it should look like. We need to remove our concern about all that cultural indoctrination. I began to reflect upon an experience I had back as a teenager. Some memory came to mind. I was a very quiet child, and I was an excruciatingly quiet adolescent. It drove my parents nuts. And one day, I was driving home with my dad. He was driving the car, and I presume we were coming back from a music lesson or something. And I must have been talking. I must have been saying something, because he pulled off the road so that he wouldn't interrupt my conversation before we got home. And the little bit that I remember was that I was saying something like, I always thought that when you grew up, you would just know what to do. You'd know how it works and what you were supposed to do. Like you'd go to the mailbox and there would be the instructions finally delivered when you were 18 or 20. And I don't remember him saying anything, but I do know that I got a chuckle out of him, and he kind of gave me this, sorry, honey, that's not the way it works response. So I really want you to understand how unique you are, how important you are, and in order to further drive home this point, I'd like to share a poem with you from this little book called The Mirror of Your Mind by Orrin Moen, who I believe was a Science of Mind minister. And this was written several decades ago, so you might need to look past the gender issues, okay? With that in mind, I close my eyes and see. I close my eyes and see myself as God sees me, as perfect as himself. Could I be less? I am his self in this unique arrangement known as me. I close my eyes and see the plan he would fulfill as me. Love molded into man, sheer joy that's taken form, a word that's come to life, that thinks, that in its turn declares, I am, creating in an endless chain. Appearances oft bind me to this truth, or blind me, excuse me. Appearances oft blind me to this truth, but then I close my eyes and see this perfect self. So remember, you are under no obligation to be anyone else. Don't you find that freeing? I really do. I just needed to remember that. So these are wonderful thoughts and concepts, but how do we apply that in our everyday life? Well, I had an opportunity to practice just last Sunday in this very room as Peggy Shin was giving her talk. And she's going on and on with her analogy about freedom and driving the car and staying in your own lane. And I'm off thinking, look at that, she's not using any notes. Isn't that amazing how she's so fluent in Spanish, she can go to Mexico and help promote science of mind in a foreign country? That is just amazing. And the more and more I was building her up, the more I was thinking, I'm not like that. I wrote this catchy line. It goes, I need to free myself from thinking that because I'm not like her, that I am somehow less her. And I thought, well, let's see if I can put this experience I'm having into the analogy of the cars that she's using. And I realized, well, I guess I'm envying her driving and her car. And I thought, well, here's a chance for me to use this affirmation I've been promoting. So I kind of ran through my affirmation a few times. I'm valuable beyond measure. This is a guarantee, blah, blah, blah. And then I thought, you know what? That's right. I settled into that knowing that I'm my own car and driver. I'm equally important as any other car on the road. And my car is just as valuable as anyone else's, just different. And I really felt like I had helped myself. I felt freed up. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't be up here today. 2 weeks ago, Bonnie was talking about her experience on the phone with the customer service representative from the insurance company and all the anger and frustration and fear that was coming up in her struggle as she was witnessing herself in that experience and wanting to be free from it. She really wanted to express herself in a loving and compassionate way, true to integrity with the expression of spirit that she knows herself to be. So the way I interpreted her words was to think that she wanted to be free of that anger, free of the frustration and fear. And in my experience last week, I also wanted to be free of the fear and the free of inadequacy. As I was preparing for this talk, I poked around on the internet for a while and was looking at how different people explained freedom and how it was different from liberty. And the version that I kind of latched onto, that I liked the most was saying that you have freedom from something, but you have liberty to do something. And I really liked that connotation of freedom being something that you were rid of. So there's certainly a lot of things I can imagine I'd like to be free of. That sense of inadequacy, sense of discord. I'd like to be free of the sense of lack, whether it be in the area of health or prosperity, relationships, any of those things that you want to be rid of, to be free. You might want to be free from the past, so that it would allow you to be focusing on this precious present moment. I was listening to a meditation program. Deepak Chopra and Oprah Winfrey, some of you are aware, right now have this 21-day free online meditations program going. And the theme for this particular program is getting unstuck. And when I thought about it, I thought, that's pretty much like freedom, isn't it, when you get unstuck? So I thought that there were 3 things that Deepak mentioned that were very relevant. Step 1, stop comparing today to yesterday. Each day is not just a new day, but a new world. Second, know that today's self is real. Your childhood self, your last year's self, even your yesterday's self, just an illusion. It's now. Don't automatically act upon old thoughts and reactions. If you find that the same thought is running through your head, you hear the same words coming out of your mouth all the time, just pause and say, I'm not that person anymore. So we come to know that we gain freedom by being aware that we don't have to rerun our thoughts and actions. And we might also strive for freedom from separation. When you reach that point, when you are free from separation, that's when you are conscious of the unity of all things with all others and begin to be aware of how important it is that we consider our interactions with others. We don't exist in isolation. We don't exist in separation. We live, whether we like it or not, whether we realize it or not, in total oneness with all other expressions of spirit. So this brings me to component number 2 about freedom, how freedom applies in relationships, in the world that works for everyone. And right now I'm talking about the world meaning my world, my own personal world, and the relationships in it. I'd like to share a quote from Ernest Holmes on this topic of freedom and unity. And he gave a speech in a large theater in Los Angeles back in 1937 on July 4th. And this talk was called The Spiritual Meaning of Freedom. And in it he says, true freedom has something cosmic behind it. If the time has come that modern science has proved that we cannot move a piece of paper without changing the balance of the entire physical universe, if we have come to the place where we know that the stuff of which our physical bodies are made is the same stuff of which the planets are made, if we have come to the place where such a profound unity is maintained that physicists believe there's no such thing as disunity in the physical world, then we can easily see what the great spiritual leaders of the ages meant when they told us that greater unity in which we all live and move and have our being, and the idea of freedom itself, is tied up with the true concept of the unity of good. If our nature is one, if God is one, and we know that God must be one, for the universe cannot be divided against itself, Then we are all tied into an indivisible unity. We shall have to get back to this unity to find the meaning of freedom. Nothing in any part of this cosmic whole could be considered freedom that would destroy the liberty of some other part of it. That would be self-destruction, would it not? And later he says, consequently, we are one, even while we are many. And since each one of us is a part of the whole, if we seek to destroy each other, we ultimately hurt ourselves. And that is the great lesson. And I realize now I should have had Larry read this in his Ernest Holmes voice. I think it's kind of ironic that as we consider freedom being part of the universal whole, because in the past I thought of freedom as being, I'm not attached, I'm separate from everything. There's nothing imposing upon me. I have one other person who has something to say about freedom and relationships. David Loy is an author who writes on Buddhist subjects. I wonder where I got that quote from. And in one of his books, he quotes a Native American woman who said, "If you have come here to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is tied up with mine, then let us work together." I think in the New Thought realm, in this place in particular, we're pretty much in agreement that we are inseparably linked. And we recognize the importance of, if I'm striving to gain my freedom, at the same time you must be gaining yours, and vice versa. I was listening to a talk by a psychologist who was explaining that he had gone to the lake one day with his little 2.5-year-old son. And they got to the lake, and the boy went down some steps and came to the water's edge and stopped, and he wouldn't go any further. The father stood behind him and tried to encourage him to get in the water, and the boy didn't budge. So then he thought, well, I'll try it a different way. So he goes down into the water and comes around, standing in the water face to face with his son, and now encouraging him to come down into the water. And again, the boy didn't move. And on that particular day, the boy never did get in the water. And the psychologist realized later there was another option that I should have considered, and he didn't think of it till later, which was to stand alongside him, facing forward together, and to go with him forward into the lake that way. And I couldn't help but think of that when Martha was talking about how Bonnie works. She might be behind some time or in front, but a lot of the time you just get that sense that she's right there in it with you. So if I understand myself to be unique, and that the recipe for my life is unique to me, I have my very own personal set of power-up yeses, those green lights, those things I want to see manifesting in my life. I have my own personal set of non-negotiable no's, and my very own set of cautionary yellows, those things that are holding me back. And I am free to deal with those in the way that I'd like, whether it means studying with a particular spiritual master, taking classes, writing affirmations, coming to service, whatever it might be that works for me to address those hang-ups, those blocks, whatever they are. And I am free to not worry about what anybody else might want to impose upon me. They might want to tell me what my recipe is. I don't have to accept that. And I also don't have to accept from myself that I stay as I am, that I can be free from my own attempt to remain stuck in the past as far as my thinking and my perceptions and reactions go. What does it look like when we apply that thinking to somebody else? to know that they are also one of a kind, unique, have their own recipe, have their own path. If we know that, if we truly believe that, then we have to acknowledge also that they have their own green lights and their red lights and yellow lights. We don't have their recipe, and it becomes inappropriate for us to judge or impose, to expect or demand, to belittle, to criticize, to nag. I looked up belittle for synonyms, and there's about 48 of them. But only to be fair, I looked up praise as well, and there are just as many for that. English language is pretty wonderful that way. Anyway, we also want to be careful not to hold other people to their pasts. And just as an example of people that are modeling for us how to live in that state of acceptance of other people, just pay attention to how Martha and Beth and Teresa interact. It's amazing. After going through 2 years of the practitioner class, they are so loving with each other. I don't even have to hear what they're saying. I just see them from the distance talking, and I know that there's no way they would ever belittle each other. And hey, Lisa, shout out to you. She was in my prac class. Okay. So, as the example of the practitioner with his, or the psychologist, with his little son getting into the lake, we learn that working alongside people probably is going to be the most effective in terms of getting results. Wouldn't you find it very freeing if everybody treated you that way? I think I would. And I'm not sure that I very often think of that as the first option, maybe not even the second or third option. So that's something I'm working on. And here we come to the third component of my talk, where we're considering freedom in a world that works for everyone, and now the world meaning the world as the global world. So Ernest Holmes, in, I believe, Living the Science of Mind, lists 10 core concepts. And core concept number 8 goes like this. Science of mind teaches that the ultimate goal of life is complete emancipation from all discord of every nature, and that this goal is sure to be attained by all. So because this part of my thinking about freedom in a world globally that works for everyone is still feeling a little bit out of reach, I'm turning to these higher authorities. Holmes is one of them. And I'd like now to make reference to another, and Larry's going to try and help me out here with a couple slides. Slide number 1, please. There we go. Who is this? And what is his role? Okay, of? Okay, next slide, please. Oh, by the way, practitioners, ministers, anybody in the front row cannot answer this question. What is this man's name? You're in the front row. All right, so he said Ken Gordon. Well, somebody else. What is his role? Ken Gordon. Reverend Ken Gordon.
The head of CSL.
Very good, Lorna. Correct. He is the spiritual leader of the Centers for Spiritual Living. I really like listening to his talks. I think he's funny. I think he's a wonderful storyteller. And the intention right now is to play a 2-minute clip from, oh yes, thank you, Larry, from a talk that he gave back in June.
The topic for today, really, for the month, has been freedom from discord. And the statement that is made that we believe that the ultimate purpose of all life is the complete emancipation from discord of all kinds, and that's sure to be achieved by all, is really a statement that says we believe that we can work towards a world that works for everyone. It's possible for us to be able to find that. Dr. Holmes did that in 1927, and at that particular point, he had a pretty good idea that it was possible for all of us to live emancipated or free from discord in our circumstances and in our lives, and that it's possible for us to attain that, not just us as individuals, but the world itself. And I believe that that's probably true. And as many of you know, I travel around North America or the world quite extensively and do a lot of speaking at different places. And the one thing I've found is that we have yet as a society or yet as a human race to make a decision that we choose to live free from discord. It's not a question of can it be accomplished, it's a question of have we even made the decision? When the Silverbacks were playing Imagine, you may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. Someday you may join me and the world will live as one. It comes to that consciousness of that collective connection to actually make the decision that we no longer want to live with poverty, we no longer want to live with violence, we no longer want to live with fear, and that it's possible for us to actually put our intentions towards something and manifest and create a world that works for everyone. But we'll never achieve it until we get that collective consciousness moving to be receptive and understanding and appreciating that it is a possibility.
Sorry for those technical difficulties, but the point of what he was saying really was, as far as living in freedom in a world that works for everyone, that it needs to be established in our thoughts first. By the way, Ken Gordon lives in Kelowna, British Columbia, and I thought it was interesting that the city motto of Kelowna is fruitful in unity. So, how do we experience freedom on all these levels in a world that works for everyone? First, as a wrap-up, begin to accept and experience your true value, if for no other reason than because there's no other one like you. Your contribution is unique. No one else can do it. We need you. Second, recognize the same in others. Refrain from thinking that they should think and act and contribute the way you do. Allow yourself and each person to be new in the moment as they release ancient conditioning and even yesterday's history. So change is allowed in. And third, as we move to that place of the fist pumping yes, as we get the idea of a world that works for everyone, where freedom is available, not just as a possibility, but as Holmes said, it's sure to happen. It's sure to be attained by all. It all starts with our thinking. I recently heard something about these special glasses somebody invented for people that have trouble with addictions to technologies. When you put on these glasses, you can't see anything on the screen. And I thought, well, if I had a pair of glasses like that and I could program them, what would I program in? What would I always want to see? And what would I prevent myself from seeing? And then I realized, wait a second, you and I are free to do that by making a conscious choice to change our thinking. We don't need special glasses to do that. So I invite you to join me in seeing freedom in a world that works for everyone. And I begin right now by saying, Namaste, I choose to see the God in you. Thank you.